In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Ghost. Yesterday, June 22nd, was the anniversary of the martyrdom of St. John Fisher. 2 weeks later, his dear friend likewise suffered the same fate, glorious fate of martyrdoms, St. Thomas More. In the new liturgical calendar of the Novus Ordo, their feast days was celebrated yesterday. In the traditional calendar, their feast is July 9th. Normally, the church would try to put a feast on the day of one's martyrdom, which is one's birthday, into heaven, but sometimes the liturgical calendar and calendar of the saints is already so filled with names of canonized saints that probably July 9th was the closest date to honor these two saints. Soon it'll be 500 years since Saints John Fisher and Thomas More died for the faith. That was in 1535. St. Thomas More was described by his fellow philosopher and friend Erasmus as a man for all seasons. And there is a play and a movie by that title, which I showed recently in the parish. And the month prior to that, I spoke at length about these great saints of the time and the terrible sinners as well. But St. Thomas More is not only a man for all seasons, these two saints in particular are very relevant to our own time and circumstances. In particular, these days, and I mean literally these days. There is much that I could say about these two martyrs of nearly 500 years ago, but I want to focus on one area which is particularly relevant to us here and now, namely the document or the written oath which was demanded of them by the man who regarded himself as the head of the Catholic Church, at least in England. It was a document that had been written by this man and approved. And with regards to both saints, John and Thomas, who were men of not only great holiness, they were also men of great prudence. And so they awaited to learn exactly what was in this oath before they would make a decision whether or not they could sign it. Because King Henry was demanding, especially of prominent individuals who might or did oppose him, that they would sign such an oath. And so they awaited, and meanwhile continued about the doing of good, or in St. John Fisher's case, continued in his imprisonment. Now, if this oath had allowed, shall we say, what we would call a loophole, a mental reservation, or had simply not stated something against their consciences, they likely would have signed it. If this oath had, for instance, simply stated that Parliament recognized Anne Boleyn as the Queen of England, they could have signed that because that was an act of Parliament and a purely civil matter. But were the oath to say that she was the wife of King Henry, when in effect she was an adulteress, and he was an adulterer, they could not and would not sign it. And if the oath included the declaration of the supremacy of King Henry as head of the Catholic Church in England, in good conscience, they could not and would not sign it. And once the oath was made known to them, they made their decision. They stood by it, and they died by it. We are facing a similar situation. There is a document that is alleged to exist that we have not yet seen, but have heard news of. Many, perhaps most or all of you, have heard that there is a document in Rome that in some manner would even more substantially curtail or attempt to end the existence of the traditional Mass and sacraments. At this point, this is a rumor. And there are many rumors that come from Rome, and that has always been the case. It's called the Eternal City. It should be called the City of Rumors. But these seem credible. And one or two are even specific. But again, at this point, it is alleged that these documents exist. One of the credible rumors, for instance, indicates that the document would disallow any diocesan priest from offering the traditional Mass or sacraments, put a complete end to it for all diocesan priests. A traditional Catholic podcaster this past week commented upon that and noted that if you look at the map of the United States and a website that lists for the good of traditional Catholics where they can attend traditional Masses, and it is kept updated so that, especially for those who travel or move, they can find traditional Masses. At any rate, if you were to eliminate from this map all diocesan parishes that offer the traditional Mass at least once a week, you would in effect wipe out 75% in this country of opportunities to attend a traditional Mass. Now again, at this stage, it is not only rumor, but even if it is true, we do not yet know if it will be signed off and approved, and if it would be promulgated, either immediately or at some future point. There is speculation, there are rumors that July 16th might be the day in which it would be made public, which would be the anniversary of an earlier motu proprio which seeks to curtail the availability of the traditional Mass and sacraments. So again, at this point, these are credible rumors, and they may be true, and we still do not know precisely the content of what this document or a subsequent revision might be, whether or not it would be signed and whether or not it would be promulgated. And so meanwhile, what do? We do as St. John Fisher and St. Thomas More did. They remained faithful to God, and they continued to the best of their ability in their particular vocations, whatever their circumstances. Whether St. John Fisher was in a pulpit preaching, or he was in a prison kneeling. Whether St. Thomas More was with his family at home, or he too was on his knees in prison. They waited, and once the document was presented to them in the form that the king intended, they refused to sign it. Now, do you think anyone was surprised that these two prominent figures, one a cleric and one a layman, one a bishop and one a husband and father, was anyone surprised that they refused to consent to this oath? No. King Henry himself was not surprised. Why not? Because these two men made their choice as they had always lived their lives. Each day and each moment, they did their best by God's grace to do what God demanded of them of that day and in that moment and in that circumstance. And so when it came to that ultimate test of signing the oath or facing execution, the choice was natural, or shall we say the choice was supernatural. And no one should have been surprised. So that's what I say to you. That's what I say to myself. We don't know for certain whether such a document exists. I think it does. We don't know precisely what it says. We don't know what changes might be made. We don't know if it will be signed, if it will be promulgated. But if it is, well then, at that point, by God's grace, in strength and prudence and insight, we will make the right choice according to conscience. That is what St. John Fisher did. That is what St. Thomas More did. And by God's strength and God willing, that is what we will do. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Ghost.